What's up, friends, and welcome into Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Chris Welsh. Today, for Week 11 ranks, we have got Pat Fitzmaurice and Scott Pianowski. News breaking before we even start the show. Just blowing up the ranks here. We're going to talk about all of it. Today, this is running backs. That is what we are going to be tackling here, getting through all the fun stuff. Pat, are you ready for, I don't know, maybe more breaking news? All of a sudden, it'll be like, hey, Pacheco is active. Just, right before the show, we just get those things that kind of throw a wrench into it. But that's what the teens of ranks are all about, right?
Are you making me promises about Isaiah Pacheco? Because I could certainly use him in a couple of leagues where I'm really scratching the felt at running back. So his return cannot come fast enough for a couple of my teams.
Yeah, Scott, I don't know about you, but we all were like, hey, wide receiver. And it has been a depthy running back situation once we've gotten to the teens with bye weeks and injuries and people losing here. So I wouldn't be super mad if we could just get a couple extra nice things more than Audric Estime. You know what I mean?
You're right. Yeah, Audric Estime, the poor man's Gus Edwards, right? A 2-down grinder who still doesn't have an NFL catch. I'd love for Estime to be a thing. I have some Estime shares, but I'm just trying, he's going to be activated for a lot of people's flexes this week. It's not like in normal seasons where the running back that you shoved in two hands for was somebody, was top 12, top 15 running back right out of the go. That's not the way the shape of the season has played out so far.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about him here in just a tiny bit. Let's get into the stuff, but a couple things first. Of course, we like to give you things. That's right. We are givers. It's the time of the season, and you've got a chance to win a signed Josh Allen helmet for free, courtesy of our friends over at pristineauction.com. All you've got to do is head over to fantasypros.com/contest, complete the form. Then you can download the Draft Wizard, review a podcast, follow us on X, Instagram, or TikTok at FantasyPros. You can do all of those things, by the way. The more entries, boom. The more things you do, the more entries. We'll be announcing a winner right here on the podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and you can claim your Josh Allen Bills autograph helmet. Gentlemen, talking about the ranks contest as we always do before we kick off the show. This week, Christopher Gimeno, apologies in pronunciation of names, was number one in the ranks. Scott Spratt and Jason William were the top three in the ranks, but not to move past them because they deserve, that praise. Our boy Mick was 4. Pat, Mick is on a generational run right now of he was 1, he was 4, but let's also not move past you, Pat. You were 18. I feel like this is your, I don't know, 4th or 5th top 20 or 25 ranking this so far this season. So as far as the weekly rank contest goes, Mick is up there, and Pat, you kind of keep doing it, my friend.
Mick's on a heater for sure. And I didn't feel like I had a great week. I thought I got a lot of things right at quarterback and then just felt sort of so-so about the other positions. So maybe the quarterback rankings carried me.
I think I might have been maybe the world's worst quarterback ranker this week. There might not have been a human being worse at quarterback than me, but I think I was, amazing at wide receiver and tight end or something like that. But we're not going to talk. We don't need to talk about me. We don't need to talk about my rank on where I was, right, Scott? We don't need to talk about where we were at.
Well, I'd like to mention that I was 5th in the Week 10 rankings. I'm sorry if you're only grading me among the other Yahoo people. I did beat one of my colleagues, but 4 of them beat me. I was 10 at quarterback, and then it went gradually downhill. The expert accuracy has shifted from something I couldn't wait to look at to something I almost dread looking at now because I'm not having a great accuracy season. But I'll tell you what, I've always done better the weeks that we hash this up with these programs. So I know that week 11 will be one of my strongest weeks because basically I'm copying off the Welsh and the Fitz pages. So, let's get to that.
Well, definitely the Fitz. Let's go that with the Fitz. You guys want to check out all the rankings, go to fantasypros.com/rankings. You can check out all the positional tiers, whether what we're talking about this second isn't covering what you want. They're going to change all the way up until kickoff. So go and check that out. You can do it on the My Playbook app, and you can just, like I said, go to fantasypros.com/rankings to see what it looks like. Let's jump into it ourselves. It's running back time. Going to the big board, the top 12. I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert. We're not going to really talk about the top 12. We're just going to give it to you, and then we're going to move into the next range because what are we breaking down? I will say it is very nice to see Christian McCaffrey back at the tippy top again. Yes, number 1 in the ranks against Seattle. D-Bro was pushing back on me a little bit, Fitz, that I was being a little bit of a Niner homer thinking that Christian McCaffrey could get to 20 touches. 19 in the week 1, because as I've said, Kyle Shanahan cannot help himself, and he didn't, and you'll probably get even more. So Christian McCaffrey's number 1, Saquon at 2, Joe Mixon, Bijan, Derrick Henry, that rounds out your top 5, Devon Achane, Kyron Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, Alvin Kamara, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, Ken Walker. That's your top 12. Just going to throw it real quick since we aren't going to like sit and break down, any specific players, or I don't have a debate. Pat, is there anything in the top 12 that just kind of jumps out to you? A too high, a too low, someone that you're just maybe a little disenchanted about, or someone that you think belongs, like way higher?
No, Welsh, it's an interesting week at running back where I feel like there are about 19 really, really strong plays. And then maybe about 11 or 12 okay flex type plays, and then the bottom just drops out after that. So I think with the top 10 or 12 guys, they're going to be the ordering is open to debate in some spots. Like I've seen some people have Alvin Kamara as high as 2 and as low as like 9. But like that's perfectly reasonable when there are a bunch of good options. It's really kind of down towards that, from 20 to 30 or so where it gets pretty interesting.
Scott, let me ask you this real quick then. I'm a liar. I'm like, hey, we're not going to talk about these. Let's talk a bunch. The news that came out right before the show, by the way, that I just teased, is that Shane Steichen was like, hey, all those things that I just said? Reverse it, scratch it. We're going to do the exact opposite, and we're going to start Anthony Richardson again at quarterback. So Anthony Richardson is back. He will be a theme throughout the rank episodes we do here. I'm just curious. Jonathan Taylor comes in at 11. Do you think that changes your process with Jonathan Taylor? Obviously, like maybe the ball doesn't move as well. Maybe it does with Richardson. He is going to take some of that running game, goal line stuff, potential. I mean, there's theoretical takeaways. Do you think Anthony Richardson coming in could bump him out of the top 12 or move him higher to you?
If we had this conversation a month ago, I would have been like, oh, okay. I'm worried about the buoyancy of the offense. They're going to move the ball better with Flacco. I don't know what they do with Richardson. Maybe I need to reappraise where I'm at with Taylor. But Flacco played so poorly the last 2 games. Part of that was what the Vikings did on that Sunday night game. But I dare Richardson, and this is a dare I might regret saying, but I dare Richardson to be worse than Flacco has been the last couple of weeks, where I felt like Steichen had to make this move. It was kind of disappointing that he had to lie to us and mislead us, but that's what coaches do. That's what coach speak is. And keep in mind, the Colts have played one of the most difficult schedules in the league to this point. They have an easy schedule going forward, or an easier schedule. So it's the right time to onboard Richardson. I had Taylor ranked 10th before the news came down. And I thought, again, it happens right before we get on air, got to make some adjustments. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to leave Jonathan Taylor 10th. Maybe it's because I don't want to argue. There might be a Wisconsin Badger bias in the room, but I think Taylor's going to be just fine. And this Jets team, man, did they lay down like lambs last week against Carolina? So I think Jonathan Taylor is going to hit 100 yards again, no matter what Anthony Richardson does.
Fitz, just a quick hitter. Are you going to adjust Jonathan Taylor at all with Richardson in?
I had the same thought Scott did. I've got him at 10 also. I thought about moving him up a spot or 2 and decided to just leave him at 10. Although I do think generally the presence of Anthony Richardson is good for Taylor. But yeah, I don't know. I right now, running back 10 feels good for him. Really great game for Taylor, by the way, last week. He looked terrific. Didn't really do anything, though, as a pass catcher and didn't score a touchdown. So the reality of his performance was better than the fantasy output.
All right, let's go take a look at the RB2s on the big board. Josh Jacobs comes in at 13. Kareem Hunt, Chase Brown, David Montgomery, James Cook. We've got DeAndre Swift at 18. Aaron Jones, J.K. Dobbins, Ramondre Stevenson, Nick Chubb, Tony Pollard, and Najee Harris. Let's go over to DeAndre Swift. We've got a little bit of a difference. DeAndre Swift has an ECR of 18. Fitz, you are lower than the consensus at 20, and Scott, you are a tiny bit higher. So let's take both sides of that. Scott, let's start with you. This offense is and has been abysmal, but they've obviously made an offensive coordinator change, and sometimes we could see, and I guess it's like, what will be the change? I kind of would think they would want Caleb Williams to make shorter decisions, shorter passes, maybe obviously establish the run a tiny bit more. Do you think that's the play here with DeAndre Swift, you being a tiny bit higher than consensus, that we see him get going?
I mean, the key for me with DeAndre Swift has been the projectable volume that he gets, right? He gets double-digit touches every game. even in this horrible run that they've been in since the bye week, 16, 16, and 18 carries. He did have a streak where he had touchdowns in 4 straight games. So Roschon Johnson gets sprinkled in now and then at the goal line, but usually when they score a rushing touchdown, it's DeAndre Swift. Generally, when you step into a situation where Caleb's underwater right now and he's not processing well, and he takes 9 sacks last week, and sacks are usually more of a quarterback stat than an offensive line stat. They need to scale things back, simplify, and that's just going to mean, I think, a lot more DeAndre Swift. You can run on the Packers. I'm not thrilled to line up with this offense. I get it, but I think Swift is actually a pretty easy player to start. The more difficult questions for this offense come with, what do you do if you have their receivers? What if you do if you have Cole Kmet? What if you do if you've been starting Caleb Williams in Superflex? Those are the hard questions. I actually think Swift is a pretty solid, reliable RB2. You may not want to watch the game, but he's going to have 20 touches in his back pocket when the game's over.
Fitz, not saying that you don't maybe agree with that sentiment, but you do have him at 20. You've got him a couple spots lower than the consensus. What's your read on DeAndre Swift and, the little bit of the unknown of what's going to happen with this offense this week?
I mentioned there are 19 running backs you feel pretty good about, and note that I have DeAndre Swift at number 20. Just my blanket fade of the Chicago Bears continues. They've not scored a touchdown in their last 23 possessions, going back to week 8 against the Commanders. In the 2 games since coming out of the bye, Swift has averaged 3.4 yards per carry and has not hit 60 rushing yards in either of those 2 games. The Bears starting offensive tackles, Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright, were both out last week, and then they lost guard Tevin Jenkins to an injury in the game against the Patriots last week. And I know the Packers have generally been considered a good matchup for running backs. That might not be as much the case this year under new defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley. They rank 14th in DVOA against the run and have given up the 13th fewest fantasy points to running backs. So they're at least a middle of the pack defense rather than an easy matchup that we want to target. So, might not be a good run defense, but not a pushover anymore. So this is just, I'm fading a bad offense here.
Another interesting one in here is Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones comes in at ECR 19. Scott, you've got him at 18, but Fitz, you've got him at 15. I guess there's like a little ambiguity about like his injury, and I think they said he's going to relatively be okay. He returned at the end of the game, so I think that can get him going again. You kind of worry sometimes that maybe that's something that's going to flare back up. It's a 3-star rating as far as the matchup goes. It's given a B overall grade on the Fantasy Pros ranking site here. Fitz, you are higher though, so I'm going to jump back to you because you are towing the line of like he's not quite an RB1, but he's still in that general range. Talk about the matchup, and I'm guessing just no general worry about maybe even the injury tapering down some of his touches, because Ty Chandler seems to be like out, by the way. It's like Cam Akers at this point.
Yeah, Chandler's number 3. I think the camera shot of Aaron Jones getting carted off the field last week was probably concerning to a lot of people, but it was interesting. They asked Aaron Jones about that. He said the reason he got carted off was because the X-ray machine at the stadium in Jacksonville was like way at the far end. And they were just doing that for time's sake. So he did return to the game. He's apparently okay. The matchup, Titans have a solid run defense, but they have given up 12 touchdowns to running backs in 9 games this season. And Jones has been pretty consistent this year. In half-point PPR scoring, he's posted double-digit point totals in 6 of his last 7 games. So I feel pretty good about him as a solid RB2.
Scott, same thing. At 18, you are like 1 spot higher, so you guys are both kind of in the above consensus. I could see Jones as like the week continues to go on, he could taper up just a tiny bit, but it is Tennessee. So, Scott, what's your take on Aaron Jones?
Yeah, very solid player. We've seen all these veteran running backs change teams, and most of them have been good fantasy plays this year, but the Vikings are struggling to punch in touchdowns, only 2 rushing touchdowns for Jones. Tennessee is 8th in rushing DVOA. They're no pushover on defense. We forget that a lot because their offense tends to lose every game. It's not the defense's fault more often than not. But I also wonder if Jones is not 100% plays, but the game gets in control. Maybe they back off him, and maybe it's the Cam Akers show in the second half where it's closer to a 60-40 or 50-50 this week where they don't have to lean on Jones. I wish I felt better. I love Kevin O'Connell, but Sam Darnold, he's ahead of every league average metric, all the downfield stuff, but he's just he's taking too many sacks and he's throwing too many interceptions, and it's keeping this offense. I mean, Jacksonville wanted to get blown out last week, and Minnesota couldn't finish the job. At the end of the day, I think we're going to see the Aaron Jones special. He's going to be like 70 to 90 yards rushing. He's going to have about 25 yards receiving, and he's not going to have a touchdown. That's why I ranked him where I did.
Let me throw one more at you guys, and almost like Aaron Jones could maybe go against him here, but and I'm going to say this is like, I know he's ranked as a top 2 back, but I think sometimes there's questions about these. Do you believe a guy like Nick Chubb is a player that you've got to get in lineups this week? He is only ranked 22nd on this list, but of the top 25 running backs on FantasyPros RB ranks, he has the best matchup rating against the Saints. We know he's been getting some volume. Fitz, do you think Chubb is a guy that A, you can trust putting in the lineup, and B, that maybe should be pushed up a little bit more, as the team is able to kind of, get the ball deep with Winston, he's getting some volume, and it's just a really great running matchup. And specifically, I looked at like the disparity between like Chase Brown and Nick Chubb, like should it be that high? So I kind of threw a lot of things at you. It's really about, is Nick Chubb a guy that people should be okay trusting getting in lineups this week?
Well, comparing him to Chase Brown, I think we feel much better about the Bengals offense than the Browns offense, and Chase Brown is explosive. Like he has the chance of breaking off a long touchdown run, or, like a 60-yard gain on a short little dump off pass or something, whereas Nick Chubb does not really offer that. He does have that nice floor with volume. We do feel a little bit better about the Cleveland offense than we did when Deshaun Watson was playing quarterback. And the Saints are indeed a really good matchup for running backs. Their run defense has been terrible all year. But I do think that's sort of the production profile for Nick Chubb is pretty accurate based on where he is ranked. Like high floor, low ceiling, probably. So back end RB2 feels about right to me.
Scott, do you think the matchup itself is something where it's like there's a little bit more trust than usual? But I mean, we also haven't seen him get like, absolute bell cow. Thoughts on Chubb?
Yeah, I'm just concerned. I don't see the explosion. This is an injury where you would think he wouldn't be close to 100% until maybe next season. 2 yards a carry against the Bengals, 3.3 against the Ravens, 2.6 against the Chargers. Not an easy run out on the schedule, but and also Jameis Winston doesn't like to throw to his back. He's not going to look to dump off. He's going to look to throw a ball downfield or maybe even throw an interception that may or may not be dropped. That's the Jameis Winston experience. So I don't want to. It's when we see a matchup like the Saints, we get excited because they've just been a turnstile for opposing running backs. But I don't see Nick Chubb anywhere close to 100%. I'm thinking he's going to have his best game of the season, but it's going to be muted with like, oh, Nick Chubb averaged 4 yards a carry today. Wasn't that nice? So I think the ranking is in the right place. I don't think he's an automatic start by any means.
Like there'll be a lot of questions out there about Nick Chubb this week. The NFL season, it's rolling along, and the contenders are separating from the pack. The one thing that hasn't changed this season, DraftKings Sportsbook, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. They are the number one place to bet touchdowns. Fade to the corner of the end zone, running back breaks through the line and gallops 60 yards to score. We don't care how they get them. We want to bet on those touchdowns with DraftKings. There's a ton of minus money RB touchdown bets this week. But who we just talked about, Nick Chubb, nope, 5-star rating with plus money. Go and check that out today over on DK. For Nick Chubb, maybe there's not crazy volume, but there definitely is goal line work for Nick Chubb, and you can get plus money on an anytime touchdown. And here's a reason for new customers to do a touchdown dance of their own. Bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook, the number one place to bet touchdowns, by downloading the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FantasyPros. That's code FantasyPros for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. All right, RBs 25 through 36, the RB3/flex range. At 25, we've got Travis Etienne, followed by Brian Robinson. I think the injury thing is kind of making his situation weird. Rico Dowdle, Austin Eckler, Audric Estime at 29, Alexander Madison at 30. 31 through 36, Jaylen Warren, Raheem Mostert, Tyler Algier, Tank Bigsby, Javonte Williams, and Tajay Spears. Okay, we talked about him a little bit before. Audric Estime, probably easily the number one waiver RB for this week. One of the top claims. I would imagine people would have been targeting more the wide receivers, but Audric Estime is going to be up there. Scott, a little, well, no, neither one of you were lower. You're actually a little bit higher than consensus at 28, but Fitz, you seem to be the pro Estime guy. You've almost pushed him into the RB2 range. So Fitz, let's start with you. RB 26 for Estime this week after he got some really solid volume. He is going up against the Atlanta Falcons this week, which is a low grade and a pretty low rating according to FantasyPros RB ranks.
I guess I do believe that Audric Estime is going to continue to be the primary early down back for the Broncos. That like it's kind of his gig now. I think there's still a role for Javonte Williams because we know that Sean Payton likes to use the running backs in the passing game a lot. Although maybe we haven't seen that quite as much, maybe because Bo Nix is more of a scrambler, doesn't need to dump off as much as Drew Brees did. But yeah, so take away an 88-yard rushing day that Javonte Williams had against a very putrid Saints run defense that we were just talking about. And Javonte is averaging 3.37 yards per carry on the season and has only topped 50 rushing yards in 3 of the 10 games he's played this season. So Estime outsnapped Javonte 26-16 last week, outcarried him 14-1. Jaleel McLaughlin was down to 7 snaps last week. So Estime is a bull, and I can understand why they wanted to go to him. Like at Notre Dame last year, over 1,300 rushing yards, 18 touchdown runs in his final college season. But as Scott said, Estime is not a pass catcher at all. He's not going to help in that area. Obvious passing downs, he's not going to be on the field. So that's why I think we're topping out at high-end RB3 rankings for him. Like there's just not any pass catching upside. He's got to do all his business on the ground, and that could be tough against Atlanta.
Yeah, Scott, you seemed a little pessimistic about it, and I feel pessimistic about it. Just it's like, okay, it's not the best offense that now, and has not been a great running offense, and now there's just 3 of them, and it's like Jaleel McLaughlin and Javonte can be the receivers, and then they're going to sprinkle in the other guys. Like, was this the peak of carries that we saw from Estime? I feel like this is, you kind of did it with the Gus Edwards thing I was about to say. I feel like this is like, he's got to score a touchdown to have felt good about putting him in there, and it's still probably a single-digit scoring week that you end up getting out of him. But I'm projecting onto you. Are you as pessimistic as I'm kind of laying out Audric Estime?
Yeah, I mean, I got him at running back 28, so he's playable. He's not a forced play, and just because you won him in free agency and doesn't necessarily mean you have to start him. You may have a situation where your backfield is deep enough that you can avoid that. A key here is, will the usage going forward, will it be a 2-man backfield or a 3-man backfield? Because remember, Bo Nix is always going to take some of the rushing equity off the table to begin with. And so if we could reduce, a big thing in the NFL these days for fantasy is trying to reduce the backfield from, it used to be we hated committees and we wanted bell cows, but bell cows are so rare now. It's all about, can we get a backfield down to 2 backs? Like, Detroit uses 2 backs and we can play both of them every week. It's no big deal. There's a lot of teams that do that. Ideally, Miami would be one of those teams, but I think that's what I'm looking for with Estime, is that also there's a difference between being a 0 in the passing game and just being a limited pass catcher. If they could even upgrade him to like Derrick Henry, like receiving work where he catches 1 or 2 passes a game, that would be a big difference, especially in those PPR formats, and just absolutely just not even being on the field for those options. It may come down to how comfortable they feel with Estime with pass blocking. Also, when people are talking about him this week and they talk about how slow he is, remember that at his pro day, he ran a lot faster than he did as his combine time. I don't think playing speed is a problem with Estime. I think he's a bona fide potential starting running back. Ultimately, the thing I feel best about here is I think the double-digit touches are in his back pocket. And even though Atlanta's run defense has been decent, this is a game Denver can win. I think Denver's a good team. I think this will be a competitive game. I'm not worried at all about Denver being blown out. So Estime at least should be relevant for all 4 quarters. The running back 28 slot feels about right. He's a good flex play this week. I don't want to go crazy on him just because, again, don't let his fab chops, because he was in a really weak fab week, I thought. So he probably went for multiple $100s in some $1,000 leagues where people are running out of time to do anything in their season. They had to just throw in with 2 hands on Estime. But I think the running back 28 tag feels about right.
All right, I've got a running back rank debate that we can play. These guys are actually right next to each other. Jaylen Warren comes in at 31 this week, and we are going to battle him up against Raheem Mostert, who's at 32. This is a really interesting one because Warren, finally kind of got going this past week. He's got a theoretical rough matchup with Baltimore, except if they're going to stop the run, that actually would bode a little bit more well for Jaylen Warren, which I think is pushing up his rank. The surprise maybe is that Warren is above Mostert in how Mostert has gotten involved in the offense as of recent, them wanting to run the ball. And it's a great matchup against the Raiders. So I'm curious at this take, Scott. Let's start with you. I personally know that you have Jaylen Warren at 32, so you're one spot lower. How do you think Jaylen Warren versus Mostert plays out, and what side are you picking?
Yeah, I'm a little bit higher on Warren because the Steelers are the most run-heavy in neutral game script team in the league. They just don't care if it's successful or not. They're going to keep running the ball. They want to throw the ball, limited amount of times. They'll take their play action shots with George Pickens, which has been working out right. And I think I might have called you Tim Welsh earlier, by the way, former Providence basketball coach. So you're in good company if I get your first name wrong. But I feel more confident in Pittsburgh's what they want to do. They're one of these teams. They don't care what you stop. They say this is who we are. This is what we do every week. You can argue if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's certainly their identity, and they have won with it. The thing with Mostert too is he's had a problem putting the ball on the ground lately, and we saw Jalen Wright getting some late carries in that Miami win over the Rams on Monday. I wonder if the Mostert thing could be running its course. I know he's probably their pass catcher in some packages. He's not as good or as dynamic as Etienne. Everybody knows that. But I think Raheem Mostert is going to be fantasy irrelevant maybe in 3 or 4 more weeks. I don't know if Miami's going to be relevant either. Even though they won Monday, they didn't really look all that great. And they really need to fix their pass blocking and trust Tua to throw downfield. But even though these guys are close for me, I think in every start-sit question where Mostert is offered to me, I think I'm going to probably go with the other guy. And certainly I would go with Jaylen Warren here.
So, Pat, what do you think here? You're higher than Warren on ECR here. And again, like the game script or the matchup might really speak well to what Jaylen Warren's going to be able to do in general. But, Raheem Mostert has gotten involved. They're just the mess, though, with the Dolphins. Mostert versus Warren for you.
First of all, Scott, I think it's okay to call our host Tim Welsh. Just don't call him Joe Walsh, because I've heard that much like the Big Lebowski, he hates the Eagles. So
I do think you actually did say the Welsh, by the way, but like T. Welsh, like Tim, like that would be, legal name of the would definitely translate to Tim, not legal.
Well, I gotta push back about the Eagles. Here's the thing with the Eagles: I do not like them collectively. I actually really like them individually. I think Joe Walsh is a really cool guy. I mean, Glenn Fry, who was in Jerry Maguire, is the Arizona football GM. Smuggler's Blues is a great song. The Heat is On is going to be played for the rest of our lives. I don't know if that's a great song, but Smuggler's Blues sure is. Henley's solo career is excellent. I just don't want to ever hear Peaceful, Easy Feeling again, or Best of My Love, or Tequila Sunrise. Those songs make me want to gouge out my eyes and go Van Gogh on my ears. The Eagles as a band, I'm not there. The Eagles individually, yeah, I'm in.
I'm very young right now. I feel very young right now with this conversation. I'm reaching to that audience, guys. All right, but we were going, Pat. You were Raheem Mostert versus Warren.
Warren by a mile. And right now, so the RB25 ranking is based on my uncertainty about the status of Najee Harris, who looked like tweaked his ankle pretty severely. It almost looked like a mechanism for a high ankle sprain last week. But we also know Najee is a warrior who does not miss many, if any, games. So we should probably expect that he is going to play. But Jaylen Warren is the 1B to Najee's 1A in this offense, whereas Raheem Mostert might be the 2A. He basically split backup carries behind Devon Achane on Monday night against the Rams. The snap counts in that game: Devon Achane 37, Jaylen Wright 9, Raheem Mostert 8, and Raheem Mostert didn't have a single carry in that game. I know Mike McDaniel said that was a product of the game plan, a very specific game plan for the Rams, but I don't know. I mean, Jaylen Wright is a regular part of this offense now. So Warren, Scott mentioned how run heavy the Steelers are. They're running on 53.3% of their offensive plays this week. Since coming back from his knee injury, Warren's snap shares have been, they've ranged from 39% to 51%. His touch counts in those 3 games, 14, 11, and 16. And yes, Warren does face a Baltimore defense that's really tough against the run, but the Ravens have given it up to running backs in the passing game, and they're probably not going to do any better against pass-catching running backs if Kyle Hamilton, their stud safety, is out with an ankle injury.
All right, last one. We're going to do a price check on the running backs because we have got both of these guys coming in as like flex RBs. It's the Jacksonville Jaguars situation with Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. And here's the interesting thing. You guys are on opposite ends of which running back. Now, Etienne, from an ECR perspective, is at the tippy top. He's at 25. Bigsby's down here at 24. Scott, you are Etienne and then Bigsby by a pretty big mile. But then Fitz, you've got, or I guess I read that wrong. I guess Fitz, you've got Etienne higher than Bigsby. Yeah, so that is all correct. So Etienne on both sides is higher for you guys, but there's a closer gap, Fitz. So just real quick on your take, Fitz, for Etienne versus Bigsby in this Jaguar situation, which, by the way, you should just not want to start any of them. But if you are forced to do it, it looks like Etienne has taken back that top Jags role.
Yeah, Welsh with the correct answer. Bench both if you can. If you don't have that luxury, I guess the reason I'm not ready to put so much daylight between Etienne and Tank Bigsby, I know Bigsby has been dealing with an ankle injury, and maybe that's should be more of a factor in my rankings. But it's my lack of enthusiasm for Etienne, I guess, and just the fact that earlier in the season, to me, Bigsby clearly looked like the better runner. Just like no contest. I know Bigsby has no utility in the passing game whatsoever, and Etienne's a pretty good pass catcher. So maybe that should factor it in too, but I just can't unsee what I saw earlier in the year with Bigsby outrushing Etienne pretty drastically, I thought.
And Scott, that's the difference here, because it was confusing looking at them, is that gap is pretty close for Pat. It's not really close for you. There's almost a full positional tier of RBs between them. And Bigsby doesn't play third downs. He doesn't catch the ball out of the backfield enough. Etienne does. If that is the case, that's great. If there's anything else, what creates that huge gap for you to put trust back into Etienne, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, not that anybody's going to miss Trevor Lawrence, but Mac Jones is playing again this week. I just feel like everything around Bigsby is collapsing. The team's collapsing. The quarterback play is collapsed. He's not a pass catcher. The game script, what are they, like a 500-point underdogs to the Lions? We saw how Detroit stuffed Joe Mixon into a pretzel last week, even though Mixon's been running really well this year. So I don't see how you could like the game script for Bigsby. I don't see how you can like him in the passing game when they don't use him. I don't think this offense scores more than 10 points. I think he's actually in some shallow leagues might even be a drop.
I kind of think so. The same. Maybe you've got some Tank Bigsby, Travis Etienne, or bigger questions. Well, guess what? We still got you covered if we didn't hit the exacts of it, because we got a weekly start and sit live stream on our YouTube channel where you can come and ask very, very specific start and sit live stream questions. Make sure to check it out on Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern. And for those on the podcast, youtube.com/FantasyPros, subscribe. You'll be notified when we go live. I gave you the time, though. You are locked in. Those, my friends, are the RB running back ranks for the week. Welsh, Fitz, Pianowski, thank you for hanging out with us right here on Fantasy Pros.